The content of this radio show is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health professional with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.
Welcome to One Soul Radio, an interactive conscious conversation grounded in psychology and inspired by spirit, with Steve Hassenberg and Callie Alpert.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to One Soul Radio here on Unity Online Radio. This is the show for you and by you, a virtual community creating conscious conversation and the opportunity to have a place to delve a little deeper in life than you may do on your own. We are offering you a unique perspective from both the psychological and spiritual world at the same time. My name is Callie Alpert here in the Central Hudson Valley in New York, with my dear friend, co-host, and spiritual psychotherapist, Steve Hassenberg.
Oh, it's great to see you again.
Great to see you as well.
It's only been about 24 hours.
I know. We have our own little virtual planet that's
right?
Often inhabited, yes.
You know, I'm so glad we're having the show today because I feel like I'm falling apart.
Oh my gosh. Your segues are becoming vaudevillian on some level. We're going to have to talk about that. So today we're going to continue with our holiday series that'll take us through to the end of the year to close out 2021, the legendary personal growth books to get you through the holidays. And tonight we are talking about one of our favorites, When Things Fall Apart, by our beloved Pema Chodron. And we're going to talk about her Buddhist wisdom. So this is a classic personal growth bestseller by Pema Chodron, who is a Buddhist nun and teacher. And it offers a radical reframe that may turn all the feelings and issues we deem to be so difficult into opportunities for growth through leaning into, instead of running away from fear, pain, and challenges. We have an opportunity to make friends with the tough stuff and open up our hearts to joy in ways we haven't imagined. So we're going to talk about how Pema has influenced us. We're going to share our take on this Buddhist perspective, and we're going to offer some steps to help you transmute your suffering into ease, or at least we're going to strive to do so.
I hope you can do that for me.
I was hoping the same the other way around.
Okay.
So, do you remember the first time you read this book?
No, but it was I don't even remember when it came out.
You know, I should have checked actually the publishing. I remember the first time I read it was right around 1999, 2000.
Right.
I don't know how far out that was from the book actually being released. I'm going to have to check that. We'll check that during the
break. It was a shocking title. And it was an eye-opening title.
Because it really turns things on its head. It's not the attractive, over the top, positive thinking title that people think sells a lot of books. It was brave.
Like, let's get to bliss in 10 easy lessons.
Exactly.
This is the fact that your life is falling apart and you better recognize it quickly and you better do something about it because it's a very human experience.
And we are all falling apart at different times, right?
Right.
The first time I read this book, like I said, it was right around 2000. I, as a placement in my mind on the timeline, I had just moved back from Los Angeles. I was ready to move back from Los Angeles to New York City. I'd lived there for 9 years and I didn't want it to be a 10-year chapter at that time. Somehow that was like a significant thing. Although now I love being in Los Angeles again. And I was also trying to leave a relationship where I really felt like I had to extricate myself and leave the state in order for it to happen smoothly. So I read this book. I can't even remember how I found my way to it, but that's magical how that happens and books sort of fall off shelves or people bring them to you at the time when you most need them. And I remember it being such a radical concept. The idea that the first thing that I learned from it was like, oh, wow, I can feel things like anger and negative feelings and it's okay. Like that, just to give them some acknowledgement and acceptance without even getting into the deeper pieces of this quite yet. And we will be walking through the tenets of the book today. Was just so refreshing and almost relaxing in some way.
Yes,
Was
somebody gives you permission.
Yeah, it was like permission to, and also just the sort of the prescription that, oh, wow, this can help just by saying, you know what, I feel really lousy today. I'm really angry. I'm really sad. Like that was my first sort of streamlined interpretation.
And my interpretation was, having grown up in the transcendental meditation movement and many other spiritual movements, the idea that you could even talk about negative emotional recycling energy was big for me, right? Big for me in a way. I mean, obviously, as a psychotherapist, I'm working with that energy all the time. But again, the permission that she gave people, the fact that you want to be receptive to these negative, difficult, fearful things and not push them away, not run away from them, and actually learn how to absorb them, deal with them, heal them, reconcile with them. It was a beautiful moment.
Definitely. I recently heard the term toxic positivity. Do you know that term?
Toxic positivity came out a week ago in the New York Times.
Okay, so I'm a little behind the curve. I heard it from a colleague who referenced it during a meeting, and I thought, I mean, I understood what it meant, but I wasn't familiar with it as a term. And it's important to think about because we're so conditioned. Society is so think positively, get over it, you'll be fine. There's a silver lining. It's meant to be. And this turned all of that, even if this term wasn't coined quite then,
right,
on its head. And
right.
so, yeah, I really just the idea of leaning in, you know, I guess one of the major overarching tenets too is the, you know, attachment versus aversion thing, right? Running toward things that bring us pleasure and running away from and avoiding things that bring us pain. And that was another one of the sort of like overall overarching concepts to even identify that was for me huge.
Right.
To be able to separate them out.
Right. Really important stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm happy we're talking about this today. And what you said before was pretty interesting to me, that it wasn't something we really talked about. The idea of toxic positivity.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're all reaching for the stars, and often we're standing in the mud, but we don't look at our boots. We kept looking at the sky. And that whole idea is that you're only living a partial life.
And that there's a lotus flower awaiting you in the mud.
Right.
I thought I'd add that as well, right?
I like it.
It's kind of all part of it's all connected. Do you want to share your Thich Nhat Hanh idea about the full participation Buddhism?
Well, yeah, Thich Nhat Hanh, for people who don't know, you know, he had a long and illustrious life. He's sick right now, and I think he's about 94.
Yeah, for a while, he's been
ill, right? But he does his illness with a certain kind of cheerfulness. He was originally a Buddhist and still is a Buddhist monk, but was a journalist during the Vietnam War.
Right.
And what I wanted to say about him, he taught me in a number of his books about this concept called full participation Buddhism. And I went, what is that? What is full participation? And full participation meant that you were present with whatever the moment was bringing, either internally or externally. You said yes to it. Talked about this a few weeks ago. We say yes to the moment, yes to the mood, yes to the fear, and kind of learn to ride with it. And if we learn to ride with it, it passes through much more quickly.
Because the more we feed it, this is the expression that I still can't remember. I wanted to say it
Yeah.
again, and I couldn't remember it during our meeting either. But basically, what you put your attention toward gets fed and thickens up, whether it's to your favor or to your disadvantage, right?
Yeah.
And that if you reject or repress or resist, it just creates more dense energy that makes it harder to move through it, makes it harder to flourish or to get to the places that you want to get to. And very significantly, way more easily said than done. So here we're setting up sort of the overarching concepts that are important to talk about today, and then hopefully we can offer some ways to actually work our way through these things. Because again, everything you're describing is, when you're in the middle of whatever deep pain, catastrophic, dramatic circumstances, to say, oh, this feels good, not even this feels good, but oh, I accept this, or yes, I'm going to say yes to this, that's an art form that takes a lot of lifetimes for many.
One thing you don't know is that during the Vietnam War, his work was so outstanding that Martin Luther King nominated him for the Nobel Prize.
Ah, love
Yeah.
that. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So I've been doing this late into our show lately, but I do want to say, if anybody would like to call, join the conversation, we'd love to hear from you, share any stories, tell us your ideas about the book. If you have read it, the number is 816-251-3555. So let's start breaking down. You want to talk about some of the main sort of tenets of the book? I mean, there's so much. It's just such a delicious and special book that now I should probably reread again because we're talking about it. The first one has to do with becoming intimate with fear and learning to walk toward fear versus running from it.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of restating what we just talked about, which is that running away from it feeds it, and as you say, makes you a fugitive, which I love, right? Kind of makes you fall more prey to it the further you try to run from it, because
I
it's
was a
got you in its
fugitive.
clutches. Yeah. When
Have
was the
you
last
been a
time?
fugitive?
I would say that I am very good at being a fugitive of my fear. Yeah.
I would be driving my car, look in the rear view mirror and see this thing chasing me.
What was chasing you?
My fear.
Mm-hmm.
I could not outrun it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I tried to outrun it, it would course correct and wake me up at 3 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
and go, hey, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
I'm after
Wake
you.
up. Right. Yeah.
Right?
But the way you're talking about it is, I think, noteworthy here too, because we always we've had a lot of conversations about the idea of separating these pieces out and recognizing them as separate energies, so that we're not dictated. None of us are dictated by any one particular thing or one particular energy or piece of us or shadow or whatever terminology you want to use. Right? We're a whole conglomeration. Confluence of different parts. And so if you can even look at the idea of fear as this other thing, this other thing or being or entity, that's energy, that's a part of you, it's kind of the first step in being able to look at it from a different perspective, I think.
Yeah, awareness is always the beginning of waking up. So if you want to wake up, and some people don't.
Yeah, there's times where I envy them.
Right? And there have been
Yeah.
times in my life that I had no desire to wake up.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to stay asleep. I wanted to stay angry. I wanted to stay jealous. And it was like, no interest. I'm right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
it's
if
more familiar if you're well trained. If you're well trained in things like fear and negative narratives and things that get in your way, it becomes very familiar and very safe to stay in that zone. I know it really well.
and that becomes your reality. That reality dominates you. There doesn't seem to be any other reality available. And you get stuck. And usually if you get stuck too long, you're probably going to have to use medication to get out of it, or weed or alcohol or something, because you're not doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. And it's not fun.
No, it isn't.
And it can also be the most beautiful thing when you start to unpack this stuff. And every time that I remember to get my, my chutzpah, my cojones in order to face whatever is bugging me in a particular day or week or whatever and really go deep, because a lot of times I'm not in the mood, but now, I know that I have to because that's how I'm
Right.
made. And then once you walk through it, it's the most amazing thing. Like you really do feel an energy of like levity around you and you feel like you've turned a corner. And sometimes it could just be in one meditation. It doesn't have to be this whole like arduous thing. But it's really, it's a beautiful thing. So before we take our first caller, what else do we want to say about fear? There's often, again, this has almost become a cliche that there's really only two emotions, fear and love, that there's nothing really,
Right.
there's nothing else. You're either in one or you're in the other. If you're not in love, you're in fear. I think it's also really important and helpful to point out that there's so many nuances and layers. So it's not about fear of heights or jumping out of an airplane or being, public speaking or being around somebody that you don't want to be around or you're uncomfortable with. I mean, those are all part of it, but it comes in so many subtle nuances. Like, the ones that I'm digging into deeper now are, for as much as I can be very positive and hopeful and optimistic and trusting in a higher realm, as you well know, I have a lot of just little parts of me that still have a fear of things not working out, of not becoming totally free of challenges, and so it's very helpful just to recognize it. That's like the first step, is just to recognize it and then allow it to exist. It can be
Exactly.
that simple. So, shall we take a call on that note?
Okay.
Caller, hi, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Hi, we can hear you. What's your name and where are you calling from? Thanks for calling today.
My name is Nikki, and I'm calling from San Diego.
Hi, Nikki. Are you familiar with Pema
Hi.
Chodron's book?
I'm not, but I would like to now read it for sure. And to me, the title is very actually comforting.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like I have been dealing with toxic positivity. I've heard of that now for I don't know, at least 6 months. I'm around a lot of people that have had trauma and a lot of groups, and so toxic positivity. And there's something else called, I don't know if you know the term, spiritual bypass.
Hmm.
Yeah, that one we're very familiar with, actually. We've talked about
I
that.
think they are
They're
buddies.
similar.
Not sure, but I think those two are kind of buddies. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So having had and having still everything fall apart, there is such a aloneness in it. So to me, that title even feels comforting, like, because it's an acknowledgement, it's a reality, it's a validation. For me, I guess in anything, the deepest pain is like feeling alone in
Yes.
whatever. So just knowing, okay, it's real. There's other people. Things do fall apart. So I'm excited about reading it, even though it's from a while ago. I feel like for a long time now, it's not been okay to just say the truth of how you feel. It's like you have to sort of whisper and wink at someone and go, I'm feeling great, wink, wink, because God forbid law of attraction hears you, so.
Yeah, I know. You can get can get caught up in, the more you get into the deep, all the books and the ideas and the philosophies and the spiritual ride, you can get really caught up. Danielle Laporte talks beautifully about this, like where you can get a little over spiritualized out, like where you're, touching all these different spiritual touch points and can drive you sort of bonkers.
What is the name of that person? Danielle? Is that?
Danielle Laporte, who is another like spiritual warrior goddess, writer, poet, spiritual influencer. Yeah. And she talks beautifully about that. Her last book, which is now at least a year or two old, is about that, sort of getting diluted with all the spiritual practices and having to give yourself a break.
Actually, I remember that one of my clients came in one day and said, I'm so afraid of having a single negative thought.
Mm.
And then I said, I think there's a lot of wiggle room in the universe. Because if you're from LA and you go on the freeway at rush hour, can you imagine all the negative thoughts? There would be so many negative thoughts during gridlock that the world itself would blow up.
That's good.
And so we've got wiggle room.
Mm. So, do you have a question or a comment, Nikki, about your relationship with speaking the truths that might be the ones that people are not as apt to hear or want to hear?
Well, yeah, I mean, I literally have had, I won't take the time to go into details, but I've just had literally a ton of tragedy and loss and,
Mm.
severe stuff, my husband dying suddenly and things like that. And so when people, for me, I think that, yeah, the guilt, like what Steve just shared, the fear, the guilt to say something, no, now you're being negative, or the fear that now you're putting a down payment on something negative, and, and that, I don't know, but it feels like it's just pushing things down, burying them. And I think that, being able to share something, say the truth of at least how you feel in the moment, being heard, for me, understood, not alone, and then it can pass, hopefully. But there's like loss, and then there's secondary pain and loss when it feels like there's nowhere for you to share that. So, once I had talked to Steve long ago, and I don't know if I should say this, but he said it's going to sound horrible, but it was the most comforting thing, because when people just try to go, oh, time will heal and you'll be better and you're lucky you had that, and all these other things people say, I find that it makes it more painful. Mm-hmm. And Steve said something like, sorry, Steve, if I misquote you or it sounds wrong, but he said something like, whatever, horrible, tragic things happen every day, all the time, everywhere, to everyone. And that, believe it or not, I didn't say it the way he did, but was sort of this comfort in a way that it isn't just me, and it's not just my tragedy, and I'm not alone in it. So
right.
I don't know. I just love this topic because
thank you. That it's the human condition. As I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking, because we're all, we're such proponents, obviously, of airing true feelings and having a safe place to be vulnerable. That's like one of my greatest missions in life, is to make that safe space for people, mm-hmm. and to model that myself. It's not very popular tack often. It's not something that people want to hear, but I also think there's a fine line also often between owning your truths and speaking your truths, and also picking and choosing where they're going to be best received. And then the next part of that trajectory, which is when you stay caught in that, when you stay caught in those narratives, and then those become the defining storylines in your life. And I'm not sure that I have anything smart to say about how to separate those out, but I do think it's important to note that distinction.
I was actually going to bring that up. So what happens is the idea of full participation from Thich Nhat Hanh was that you experience things fully, but in experiencing things fully, you're actually allowing them to go.
Mm-hmm. Right, to move through. Mm-hmm.
Because what you're saying, Callie, is so important. Where people get hung up is that these thoughts and feelings become narratives. To the degree that they can become a religion, to the degree that they impact your physiology, to the degree that you can get sick. Right. And I'm not, again, it's this very delicate balance between experience and avoidance.
Right.
So I'm not talking about avoidance. I'm talking about fully experiencing your feelings and knowing that if you keep repeating them ad infinitum, it's not healthy.
Right, because that concretizes them too.
Right.
So I think there's a big distinction here that's worth noting, which has to do with like what you just described, kind of letting it wash over you, walk through it and soften, versus giving it too much space in your mind to concretize it, where it gets into your body and becomes just this dense mass of definition. So I think it's it's an important distinction. And but thank you for bringing it up, Nikki. And we highly recommend this book. Pema is a beautiful, legendary, special teacher. And the other thing that's so beautiful about this book is that it's still, to my memory, one of the least like non-denominational, and I say that not from like the literal perspective, but how do I put this? There's just something very like clean about it. There's not a lot of like spiritual ease or like clinging to certain vernacular. You know, it's very gentle and very human and extremely accessible and approachable. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. So we highly recommend it. Thank you so much for joining us
Good
today.
review.
That's I'm gonna get kickbacks now from Pema and her monastery.
Thank you, Nikki.
No, I'm not. So we're going to move in a moment to one of the next tenets, which is the idea of full presence. It's sort of harkening back to what you said about Thich Nhat Hanh and the idea of full participation. So the full presence has to do with being comfortable in the groundlessness and in the vulnerability and in the uncertainty of so much of what life presents for us. The idea that everything is transitory, the idea that there really is nothing to hold on to truly in the most pure fundamental way, whether it's our identity, our relationships, our material possessions, our family. The only thing really that we have to hold on to is the deepest part of our essence. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to ask you to try that on for size. And when we come back, we're going to talk more fully about full presence. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to One Soul Radio here on Unity Online Radio. My name is Callie Alpert. I'm here with Steve Hassenberg, and tonight we are continuing our series on the legendary personal growth books to help get you through the holidays, and we're focusing on When Things Fall Apart by our beloved Pema Chodron, a seminal, beautiful, internationally acclaimed book having to do with, really, the simple version is leaning into the things that feel like shite, right? So we talked a little bit about, we have a bunch of tenets to go through, but we'll see how many we get through. They're all valuable, so we don't have to go through each one of them. But first we were talking about becoming intimate with fear and just the idea of recognizing fear in yourself and trying to create some space between you observing it and it so that you can get to know it a little bit better. And now we're talking about the idea of full presence and what full presence means, right?
Yes.
So yeah, go ahead. Tell me what full presence means to you.
Well, full presence means that your mind is extremely quiet, right?
That's a
I
concept.
think Alan Watts came up with a great piece on this.
Mm-hmm.
He said, sometimes if I say to you, concentrate as hard as you can, and then you try to concentrate and get all that stuff in the mind going, but it's really about becoming still. And if you're still, you'll be able to concentrate perfectly. So presence is a lack of intervening thoughts, a lovely stillness, like on a lake at night with the full moon coming down, reflected in the water.
It's kind of what's happening here tonight. I mean, that's sort of, you're being literal. That is what's happening over here in my backyard today.
It's called a micro moon. Did you know that?
Beaver moon, which I got a little.
I was like, what is a beaver? I guess it's when the beaver.
Yeah, when they get.
What do they do? They hibernate?
Well, I think it was historically had to do, number one, time of year when trappers were looking for them for their pelts before winter. And then I also think it had something to do with the, I have to see, I just read about this the other day. Something to do with them like being all ready and geared up to kind of go underground for winter, but I can't remember if I'm making that part up or not.
Whether you are or not, it sounds perfect.
You like it?
Yeah.
But go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just like, yeah, you're spying on me again.
So presence is stillness.
Mm-hmm.
The mind is still. The mind is clear. The body is at peace. And you have full receptivity and an open heart.
And to get there.
Yes.
Because again, we humans are not conditioned. Our minds can be very loud and noisy and busy.
Yes.
And so the goal then is to try to create whatever kind of space you can to let the magic in, right?
Yep.
The other piece of this too with full presence has to do with, I think the more you get in touch with your inner essence and emptiness and formlessness start to take up more space, if that's not too oxymoronic.
Mm.
That you can become more comfortable with a sense of groundlessness. You're not as defined by the things that define us every day. Who I'm in relationship with, where I work, what my title is, how much money I make, the car I drive, my philosophies, my politics, my religion, like anything that we're attached to that makes us feel safe and tethered in a good way and defined, because I think a lot of us are conditioned to feel like that is what gives us grounding. So this is suggesting that we play with the idea before you have to, because it's often when people come to this is when there's crisis and when there's difficulties and when things get stripped away, all the things I just mentioned get taken away from us. That's often when we pick up these books, right? Is to play with the idea of who you are without all those definitions and labels, and to dig a little bit deeper to find that empty space that you're describing. I think that's a big part of what Pema is suggesting in this book.
Are you suggesting
Probably.
that being grounded is actually being groundless?
I would say that I agree with you, Your Honor. Yes. Yeah. Right. I mean, that is what we're saying. I love your, playing with the words, but yes, I think that is what she's suggesting
Right.
and what we're playing with here. Yeah.
So what does groundless really mean? As silence takes over the radio waves.
Right. Well, you're asking me to really give you an answer. I know.
What does groundless mean to you? I'll tell you what it means to me.
In this context, it means all of the, the things that I said as I aspire to be wise and talking about it, which is not being attached to the things that we think keep us safe and defined and give us a sense of identity.
Yeah.
That said, do I adhere to that and succeed in that thinking every day? No, not at all. In fact, I feel like often in the last bunch of years when I haven't had a lot of the usual basic things that people define themselves by, and I've tried to dig deeper and do deeper inner work and gotten much better at that, at getting in touch with my true essence and using that as a grounding, there's still a part of me that gets wildly frustrated that there aren't more external things around me that I can kind of check boxes to. After a while, it's like, oh, the spiritual stuff and this, the aspirational spirituality piece is exhausting sometimes.
Right.
So that's my that's my honest answer, is that's a work in progress always for me. And then there's the answer of, like, in the purest form, I do think that's what it means. I think that groundless is grounded.
So I agree with everything you've said,
Mm-hmm.
and I will follow you. And the other way of thinking about it is that at the essence of the universe, which we are part of, is the state of beingness. And that beingness is without form. It's invisible. That's why they used to have mystery schools.
Because I love that term, the mystery
don't
school.
you?
I love that. Yeah, I love that. I know you've participated in a lot of mystery school action.
I have.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that life is a mystery. And the biggest mystery is that this, what we're calling groundlessness, is the ground for all things.
Mm.
It's the essence, it's the core, it's the foundation, and yet it's invisible. You can never touch it. You can't burn it. You can't taste it. You can't smell it.
Can't smoke it.
You can't smoke it, but it informs everything.
Mm. That's the Ram Dass, the mantra of love, serve, and remember. It's the remembering piece.
That's
it's
right.
The fact that that's the sort of stardust and beauty and love and source light that we came from. And we do a really good job of forgetting when we take this human form.
We do.
So, but yes, I think it's a beautiful concept. I do believe it. I feel like it's very, very true. And getting there is a process of shedding layers and emptying out and continually letting go of all these things that we think define us as human beings to get more toward that groundlessness, right?
Yep.
Did you want to talk about your Sanskrit word, shunyata?
The shunyata is a great
Shunyata.
word
Yeah,
because when people talk about Buddhism, they always talk about emptiness.
right.
Never made a lot of sense to me. I didn't want to be empty. It's like an empty gas tank. And I wanted to be full.
Mm-hmm.
And so shunyata is formlessness. That's a different way of thinking about it. It's without form, but it's full. You have a full gas tank, which is formless, rather than an empty tank, you know?
Yeah, it's like a full tank with air in it. So it's funny. I'm just coming up with really bad analogies just to ground them. But go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Right. So the way I think about this is that the way I describe this essence, the essence is fullness. It's responsible for all of life. It is the energy of life. It animates us. It is the creativity. It is the God source. It is our higher spirit, and it's formless, invisible.
Mm. How well do you know formlessness? Because I do like your stories.
How well do I know formlessness?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like I'm trying to think of the last time I felt it. I've definitely felt like stripped away to the core, not in pleasant ways, but like, where I've been in whatever challenging situation where I feel like I don't feel tethered in the external ways that I want to. And then you have to dig deeper to get like tethered and grounded in yourself. I guess there's a formlessness in that.
Absolutely.
But it's not it's not my natural state. It's my aspirational state. It's not my natural state.
For
But yeah.
sure. Anyway, so we moved about 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago. And you know how moves are, they're totally disorienting and discombobulating. And I was feeling really tired and out of it and a little angry, and I didn't want to move. And I went to bed and I felt old. And there we were. And I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and nobody woke up, which meant there was no me anymore. And my experience was that I had never been born, I had never died, and all I was aware of was an infinite illumination that went on forever. And I was in that state for about 10, 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nothing else. There was no world. It was just illumination. And I fell asleep.
And that's not induced by anything except spirit.
Right. Right. It was a
And
gift.
Right. And it's also it's a state that often people induce in different ways using, whatever. I mean, high states of meditation obviously is a way to go, but it's also what people describe when they break through those barriers using psychedelic therapy, etc. And so would you describe that as formlessness, and did it stay with you?
It's totally formless. It's totally groundless. And well, it didn't. I actually was thinking when I woke up that morning, it was very, very present with me. And I was thinking, could I actually live this way?
Mm.
Because the vastness was incomprehensible. And I thought, how would I even be in my body? How can I be that and this? Would it be possible?
Interesting. That's why it happened in the middle of the night.
Right.
So as much as, the two of us are extremely interested in feeling those states and getting to those higher states, that's a really interesting, you have plenty of stories where you've experienced this kind of thing. And yet that's a really powerful question. But all this to say, to circle back to where we are with Pema, what a beautiful frame of reference and what a beautiful description of experiencing formlessness from a high state of consciousness. That's really very special to hear. So thank you for sharing that. One of the next tenets is, let's see, which one should we go to? That's a little different from what we've talked about. This is sort of going back to the first Buddhist noble truth, the idea that suffering is inevitable and that everything is transitory, right? The first noble truth in Buddhism being that the greatest human suffering comes from attachment to that which is transitory. So kind of talking about what we were stating earlier, the more we are attached to even the comfort, the comfort of our house and the comfort of our relationships and all the things that are very important for we humans, that if you're going to at least try to adopt some of this philosophy almost before you have to, it's a helpful practice to get in touch with just even identifying where your attachments are, really, right? That's
Absolutely. I mean, that's certainly the first step.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, probably one of the central pieces of Buddhism is non-attachment, non-aversion. And
the middle wave of neutrality.
The middle path,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're not necessarily grasping, you're not grasping too hard, you're not white knuckling, and you're not running away too fast. As Thich Nhat Hanh said, full participation, right? I have to say this because you laughed about it. My mother was a half Buddhist.
All right. During the break, we were talking about this. Go ahead.
My mother was a half Buddhist because she always used to say, life is a struggle, life is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And I got the same thing from my Jewish mother in New Jersey also, which is where you had your Jewish mother in New Jersey.
Where did she say?
Life is hard. Life's not fair. Life is hard. So we were joking that's like, it's a very quintessential sort of Jewish stereotypic thing from older generations. And yet maybe in some ways there's a little piece of it that it was a little Buddhist, a little Jubu, as people would say, right? Like kind of a combination, a hybrid, even though in my family, it wasn't. It was about, quell your your idealism and tamp it down because, this ride's not easy. It wasn't about the extra step that we're speaking of today, which is to make friends with it and to find it as a reassuring sort of permission slip to be okay with things that are hard. We didn't get to that step.
And if we go back to why Buddha left his father's kingdom, his father was a king and he was a prince. The reason he left was because he wanted to understand how to overcome old age, sickness, and death.
Oh, right. Nice.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's really cool. That humanizes it a lot.
Yeah.
Humanizes that story.
That's why he went on his quest.
Mm. The other piece of this too is to, first of all, just to accept the idea that suffering is inevitable. And also to try to be conscious of when we're feeling victimized or punished. To try to reframe that so it's not like something life is happening to us, right? But kind of happening through us. That our soul creates these moments to help us overcome our fears. That's something we talk about a lot. That's more, I guess, Vedic thing than it is a Buddhist thing. But the idea
that's more Vedic.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we put this in perspective. Buddhism occurred, the Buddha arrived about 500 years before Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And the Vedic arrived about 2,000 years before Buddha.
It's ancient stuff.
Right?
Yeah.
The Vedic priests were actually very angry at the Buddha because he wanted to, this is amazing, 500 years ago, 2,500 years ago, he was ordaining women to be Buddhist priests and outcasts to be Buddhist priests.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, talk about openness.
But what happened, because Buddhism, in all due respect, became a lineage of real kind of patriarchy?
It did, but it didn't start that way.
Interesting.
And the Vedic priest at the time was so angry with him for doing that they buried a dead body on his property and said that dead body was because of him and he caused the murder.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's interesting. I never heard this before. That's
Yeah.
really cool. Yeah.
So they wanted to unload him pretty early on.
Hmm.
Happens to the best of us.
Exactly. So how does that, so let's bring that back to where we
Yeah.
are in terms of like the Pema's book and our kind of offering. How does that circle back, do you think?
That's good. How do you want to bring it back?
Yeah, no, I'm asking you how you want to
Oh,
bring it
you
back.
are.
Yeah.
I'm bringing it back because what Buddha learned was that, and this is beautiful, at the, this is such a great story because when he sat under the Bodhi tree,
Hmm.
he made this decision that he was sitting there until his liberation or his death.
Right.
And then what ensued after that was that it's what we're talking about today, every difficult feeling, every jealousy, every greed, every fear came to him in different forms. And because he sat through all of them, including his own death, he attained liberation.
And including being pelted by arrows
That's,
that turned into flowers, right?
yes, that was Mara. Mara was the last one to come. She's the goddess of death. And she had an army, and the army had flaming arrows, and they all landed around the Buddha.
So
It didn't
dramatic.
touch him,
Mm-hmm.
and he sat through it
Mm-hmm.
and attained his liberation.
So what a beautiful metaphor. I mean, first, obviously, first, such a beautiful, historic, and important story. And second of all, what a beautiful metaphor for all of us to sort of think about, because all of these things that happen in our daily life feel like poison arrows.
Don't they?
Yeah. And if you could just sit in the stillness, ultimately, they can turn into beautiful flowers.
They
And
bloom.
yeah.
Every difficult thing finally blooms.
Mm-hmm. And again, I always say this with the disclaimers that we don't want to Pollyanna it up too much over, around here, or polish or minimize difficulties. But ultimately, this is all based on very ancient wisdom tradition, and it's true.
Right.
And so, just to try to adopt little bits and pieces of it can be a really powerful and helpful thing. So I'm trying to think if we have, before we get to our action steps, do we have room to maybe squeeze in another one just very quickly? Let's see. We can't be present if our stories are running rampant. So we did talk about that earlier, the noise of the mind. But fundamental to most spiritual practices is the idea of putting the mind aside and trying to find more distance between our soul, our spirit, and our narratives that are running rampant in our heads, right?
Yep.
You said the story of God is not the experience of God, which I love. Can you explain that really quickly, and then we'll get to our action steps?
Yeah, this comes from communication theory and psychology, not about God. They talk about the map is not the territory, right? So if you're looking at a map and you understand it all, you're not walking on the earth. In the same way, we all talk about God, but the actual experience of God is a extraordinary experience. It's overwhelming. It takes people to their knees. It pushes people off of horses. Lightning comes. All kinds of things happen. And that's so different than talking about God.
Beautiful. Love that. So let's get to some of our action steps. First, we're going to ask that you remember a time when your life seemed to be falling apart, but in retrospect, you became aware that it was really falling together. And simply just replay that from the point of view of a rear view mirror and sort of give yourself permission to revisit that chapter in your life as a way to give you a hope or belief system that these formulas work. It's just very hard to remember them when we're in the middle of our challenges. Second one, lean into the discomfort of life. Try to recognize maybe a fear that you're even feeling today or this week that you've been avoiding. Is there something that you can lean into? And lean into doesn't mean you have to conquer it or perfect it or get over it. It just means you get to know it a little bit better rather than tightening up and resisting and kind of working, trying to run away from it. And finally, recognize that life is difficult and tragic and full of pleasure and pain, and cut yourself a break. Practice self-compassion. Try to treat yourself the way you would your best friend when they're suffering. And just take 5 or 10 minutes a day, once a day, for, as Steve calls it, a kindness retreat, a self-compassion kindness retreat. So to repeat those in honor of our beloved Pema Chodron, number one, remember a time when your life seemed to be falling apart, and recognize that, or how you recognize thereafter that it was really falling together. Replay that from the point of view of the rear view mirror. Secondly, lean into the discomfort of life. Maybe think about a fear that's on your mind or in your heart even this week, small or big, and just get to know it a little bit better. Realize that you've been avoiding it, and maybe try to find a new way to lean into it. You don't even have to commit to leaning in. You can just play with that for a few minutes. And then if you hate it, go back to whatever relationship you had with it. And thirdly, life is difficult. It's fine to acknowledge that. It's full of pleasure and pain, and we're suggesting that we all remember to cut ourselves a break, be your own best friend, treat yourself as kindly as you would your best friend, and take 5 to 10 minutes a day for a little kindness retreat. So with that, number one, we want to honor this book and Pema Chodron, When Things Fall Apart. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. You can find this podcast on Unity Online Radio. You can find us on Instagram at One Soul Radio, on Facebook at One Soul Radio Podcast. Please engage with us. Let us know things you'd like us to talk about going forward. Next week, in honor of the holiday season, we are going to be talking about gratitude as good medicine. We're wishing everybody a beautiful ramp up to the holiday season, and we will see you and talk to you soon. Have a good week.
Bye.